made me rethink a few things since the report came out, and it keeps bringing up some of the issues that are some of the issues. I urge you to go ahead and if you have time or you have some thoughts, please write down your thoughts. All right. What do we could get volunteers, and I had some help from French Quarter Management. Hooked me up with a lot of people to go put out monitors and listen to the city. And if you have the nature, if you say, hey, these are the complaints I have, that's interesting. I need to know those kinds of things. You know, what do we need to focus on? Okay. And any ideas? Again, any ideas? If you have questions, we've had some emails back and forth to answer questions, and it stimulated some good conversation, I think. So, now we're going to get out. How am I doing on time? Am I early? I might be early.
3:46.
Oh, great, perfect. I can let you all go early today. We're going to go out to Bourbon Bandstand, and we're going to look at sort of what are the levels in the street. It won't be too long, but we'll also look at what's inside and what's outside, and then what happens when we close the facade. And we're going to relate our numbers to our perceptions. I think we're just going to see some numbers. Say, well, this number is this number is this. So we can, see and hear. We have a subjective evaluation of it, but we also want to look at the objective, because I think that's where we sometimes lose, where it gets a disconnect. And we talked about that last week, is you get a disconnect because, I work with these numbers all day, every day. So it's, it's like breathing for me, but then other people don't know what's the metric, how do you measure? Okay, so we'll look at that. And let me show you something that we did a test yesterday morning. I don't know if you can see this as well. I should have blown it up some. This is down the street from the club that we're going to today, down by the Herman Grima house. We measured out in the street. And with everything open, this is the high point. And we closed the side doors, and it all dropped down. And then we started to close the front doors, not much difference. All the doors closed. It got a little bit better. But there was a huge difference when we closed the side doors, and there's been some talk about what do we do on the side streets. That's where the sound's traveling down to get to the residents. Well, maybe that's something we need to consider. We certainly see an impact. And you can see up the red line at top is the C weighted, and the blue line at the bottom is the A weighted, right? So you can see there's a consistent difference. And of course, when we pick numbers, when we talk about a sound level cap, we're going to have to say, keep this gap in consideration. That's the gap we're going to use, something like that. So we know that A-weighted sound means this about this and C-weighted. So we're not saying, I know there's some concern about C-weight being like, well, if we use C-weight, it's going to ruin everything. Well, it turns out that C-weight is kind of important for us to, we know what people can live with inside of places, and we have to backtrack all the way to the source. So we know that we want to be below a certain level inside people's houses so that they're not disturbed by it. What happened in the front? This is on the street. I put all the doors open, same. All side closed, the same. I closed half the doors in the front. It's the same. Closed all the doors and it dropped. Okay, a little bit. So what is we have there? About 5 decibel drop. Okay. So when we talk about how many doors should be open and closed, well, certainly we know that fewer doors might help. Fewer doors open might help. We know it helped on the side, but when we're looking at Bourbon Street itself, it may not be as big of a deal. So, but again, as we go through this and we get more and more data, we're going to find out more things. We were able to do some nighttime tests, clubs shutting down on either side of it, or both clubs shutting down. So we have some more information to work with all the animals in the street.
Can you go back to that previous slide?
Sure. Sure, you can see here, again, we see a drop of about 10 decibels.
Didn't it surprise you that the C dropped in the same way that the A dropped, even though all you're talking about is a pane of glass, which normally we don't think of as stopping C?
Well, it has some effect. I think that's, I'd have to go back and look at all the information, but Getting from the inside to the outside through the opening is one thing, and actually shutting it makes a difference because the door will absorb sound by vibrating. It's actually, the door's getting excited. Sort of like a gypsum wallboard will get excited by a little frequency. So some of the energy dissipates that way. I think that's what we're getting at. So,
What were you measuring, Dave? How far away from the,
oh, this is out in this is down the block.
you're a good way away.
I don't know, I forget how far, maybe not 180 feet, probably 100 feet, maybe something like that, 100 feet. And then if we look at the next one, this one is out in the middle of the street, just kind of picking up all the information, and everything else is pretty low. So we get to see just what the effect of this is on that moment. Okay? Because we try to do things with everything active, and then we try to also do isolated tests.
So how are you going to decide where the noise is coming from, the club or the street?
Well, that's a good question. Deciding where the noise is coming from, we're getting into where the health department will hopefully educate them so they understand this better. Like you can't handle hand a monkey on a sound meter and expect it to work. You're going to have the training. Part of the recommendations at this point, at least where we're headed, is that we're looking at measuring at the source. Okay, that means when you get closer, the levels are much higher. So we have to make those levels appropriate. Okay, but then we know what's going on. Part of the test that we did over the weekend, in the middle of a big crowd, we were able to, when a club was active or not active, we were able to, and we're still sorting through this. I think we're finding that we have a pretty reasonably accurate understanding of what's going on. The crowd noise is not affecting the reading as much as we were thinking it might, but we're still going through that information. But I think the other part is when you have properly trained people out there, they're going to be able to make those calls and be able to be smart about it. Say, well, clearly there's something else going on. Or they're going to be able to identify the source well. Does that answer your question? Yes, Mary?
I don't know if you already covered this or not, but are these all peak numbers or because duration is also?
Thank you, Mary.
Averages.
Thank you, Mary. What we did was we used a consistent source. We used LEQs, the equivalent levels, okay? Because, and that's what we're steering towards. And we talked about that last week. And what we ended up with is a sort of consistent source. These are 20-second samples because we're working very, and the thing about this is that 20 seconds is probably enough. 15 is usually enough to get a good low-end sample. So 20 is what we're doing. They do that in Miami, I guess, in some entertainment district there. I think that's sort of where we're headed if we can, if that's appropriate. If you have input on that, I would be very interested to hear what you have to say, and we can include that in what we're discussing. I think we're at this, we're at the thank you slide. So I think yes, yeah, so I would love to hear whatever, yes.
So I just had a quick question about the difference between DVC and DVA. That side of there's about a 15 decibel gap between the two. Is that true across the board? Does it vary from location, genre of music, or
Well, let's see what we have here. We see 15 here. Sometimes we see 10. Sometimes we see 20. Depends on where you're listening from, and also sometimes the nature of the music. So one of the things is most popular music is really added more bass, in general. So it sort of permeates a lot of spectrum, but there are certain musics that are even more bass heavy. And so, yeah, you can play that, and yes, you can play it loud, but then you're going to have to take measures to corral it. That's it. That's if you want to have tons and tons of low end, you're going to have to figure out how to control it. That's really what it comes down to. You can play it at a lower volume, but then maybe people just want it loud. So I think that's sort of like the louder you get, the more you have to deal with it.
And so you're taking that into account as you figure out these levels will be. I guess my concern is that sort of by the levels can sort of create almost what genre of music you can play at what level, right? So you've got hip hop, which is very bass heavy, and then ABBA, which is not so bass heavy. You don't want to, you don't have to choose between ABBA or Tupac, right? Like you need to have a definition.
Bluegrass and
right, exactly.
right. Well, think about it this. Well, they're probably going to play bluegrass at that volume anyway. But I will say this. if you're going to do that, I'm gonna come back to the same thing. If you're going to do that, you're going to do it at a loud level, then you have to figure out a way to reduce the impact. You know, it's sort of a kind of, you know, the more noise you make. I mean, if you want to light off atomic explosions, you got to control them. You know, light them off, right? You know, for the fuse, right? But that's the idea. You know, I think that's sort of the responsibility of the source. The onus really falls on the source to make sure that they're not creating problems for other people. That's it. Yes?
David, you're juggling two things here, the supposed patrons' experience and the experience of the non-patrons, whether they be residents or transients. And you're talking about the difference between sound absorption in the room and sound isolation going outside. Now, I've just recently had an experience within the last week where a performance was going on in a very echoey room, a lot of hard surfaces, and the apparent level was pretty loud. And the same band playing in the same room, after some softening, some drapes were put on the back walls and the side walls, the apparent level was lower. Now that's great if you're in the room listening, if that's what you're looking for.
Right.
But if you're running a club and wanting to give the patrons the experience of, man, it's great and loud in here, don't you almost have to recommend going the other way, hardening the interior while you're isolating the exterior, so that you don't have to turn it up as loud. The patrons feel that sense of loudness just from the reverberative nature of the room.
Well,
is that a useful approach at all?
let me, a couple things about that. One is that if an operator wants a lot of control over the way it sounds in the room, then they have it heavily absorbent, just so that you can control the way it sounds. Okay, otherwise the room starts, you're hearing the room and not the speakers. So there's that, and if we look at a source like a generator, okay, if we put absorption in the room, it drops the level in the room. Okay, if you have it hard, it's louder. That's 6 decibels louder. So I see what you're saying, like, well, we could turn it up to compensate for the absorption. But yes, but then again, we're talking about, it still will be the same volume, it's still the same sound level. If you go 6 decibels higher because now you've got absorption, well then it's the same as if you had it 6 decibels lower and then had it whole hard surfaces. So it sort of
It's
comes.
the same outdoors?
Yeah, it's the same sound level inside. I mean, the same sound level inside is the same sound level inside, I think.
But isn't there a difference between the apparent sound level of a very echoey room and a dead room?
If you take the same source
Yeah.
and you put it in a live room, it will be louder. Okay, the same source, meaning the same sound level,
Yeah.
like same sound power. Then the sound level in the room will be louder in a hard room than it will be in a soft room. However, if you turn up to compensate for the softness, it's the same sound level.
Understood, but if they, just to follow this one more time.
Okay.
One more. If you have that same sound level in a hard room, which makes it louder in the room,
Right.
is it louder to people outside the room?
Yes, because you have the buildup of reflections builds up the sound. I think that, thank you for clarifying the question. Yes?
Why was there such a drastic drop in dB levels when the side doors were closed as compared with what we're looking at here? When the front doors were closed, it really didn't make that much of a difference,
Well, this position is in front of the place.
right?
So all the doors, the front doors are open, the front doors are open, the front door, the one front door gets, or a couple gets closed, we get a little bit of a drop, and then they close all of them. So that's why that's the front. And the other measurement, backwards. There it is. This is 100 feet down the street,
All right.
okay, on the side street. So once you close the side doors, you get a huge improvement. And so that may be something that's something that we're examining. And I think some bars have done that where they've actually closed off the sides.
So it was the distance, really, that made the biggest difference? You measured it from
No, the level itself is lower because it is further away. But
Okay.
the drop in level here is because they closed the side door. It's measuring down the street. What's the best way?
St. Louis, right?
It's on St. Louis.
Right, if you go-
So you're Bourbon and St. Louis.
Yeah,
Right, it says they got Bourbon Street, you close that, St. Louis,
right.
close Bourbon Street, so they're not.
What is it about the placement of the speakers? Is that made, I guess I'm just kind of confused as
What it is that if sound is let out onto the side street, then it will excite and travel down the side street. So sort of closing off the side street faces of the building allows you to, that keeps the sound more on the Bourbon Street as opposed to on the side street. That's what the result, that's what this sort of shows. Okay, it's one set of data. There's probably more that we need to take, but I think that some of those measures have been used already, and I think with some success. So I think this is helpful.
I guess I was just kind of wondering if it has something to do with, are there being more ambient noise too on Brewer Street, even though you're measuring at the source, right?
Not here, we're measuring, this is measuring at the street. This is just to show what happens further away.
Okay.
Okay, this is not measuring at the source. There are source measurements here, but they're just for the consistency of understanding what we're doing as a source. Yes?
Well, you do all this fixing it up, but if people are walking in and out of the place, the door's gonna be open.
That's true, but if the entrance and exit is in the front of the building instead of the side of the building, then that's what we're discussing, I think. I understand 100% what you're saying. No matter what, if the doors are opening and closing, you're going to have these rate up and down fluctuations. So I understand 100%, but the thing is, we're looking at the facades of the buildings and how do we deal with them. And again, some places have closed off the side street and have had some success with reducing their impact on the neighbors. So I think that's an important thing to remember when we're examining how to do this. Okay, remember, we're talking about a toolbox. We're coming up with ideas, and maybe more people will run with this and see how they can improve or reduce their footprint. Does that make sense? Am I making sense to you? Okay. Any other questions? No other questions? All right. Well then, let's take, I see the time is 4 o'clock, right on the money. So we'll 15 minutes, and those who wish to come down to look at some sound level meters and hear some sounds will be, in 15 minutes, we'll be down at
Bourbon Bandstand
Bourbon
at
Bandstand.
St. Louis and Burke, corner of Bourbon and St. Louis.
And I thank you very much for your time.
If you haven't already, please sign in the.
How's Jimmy doing?
He's
doing pretty good.
Nice to meet you. I make it up.
Hanging in.
Sure.
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 His mother died 6 months ago, so he's every other day he's crying, and he's still not over it. Yeah,
That's hard.
It is. Is this your pen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I've still got to write something.
Sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think I think if that's what we're gonna do, that's fine. I think the sound walks are very powerful. Very, very cool.
Everybody can see.
Right. Well, that's sort of what we're doing today. A little bit of that.